Recently, I was asked the following question that has really gotten me thinking. One of you asked, what is one thing you wish you'd done differently while being in the classroom? Is there something that you maybe put on a pedestal that wasn't as important as you thought, or something you'd wished you would have focused more on? And my initial response was thinking more of myself than I necessarily should have. I really felt like everything was up to me. And I put a ton of pressure on myself and my own performance, and thus the performance of my students. And it wasn't fair to anybody. That's the best way I can say it, is I thought too much of myself. That was my initial response to this question. But the more I thought about it, the more I kept thinking of more and more things that I really would want to do differently. And so that's why this is becoming an entire podcast episode, is my response to this question. And this question is incredibly timely because my youngest child has one more year of like 4K or pre-K, where he's essentially home with me most of the time. And I always kind of said, hey, I'm going to revisit potentially returning to the classroom when he starts kindergarten. And so that won't be this fall, but the next. But this time next year, I would be interviewing for jobs and such. So it's really something that matters to me and is something that I'm giving a lot of time and attention to thinking through. And so even though my initial gut reaction is that one thing is thinking too much of myself and almost too much of my potential impact, in the sense that like I made it all up to me and I put so much pressure on my own shoulders, there's a lot of other things that kind of build into that. And so I'm going to share those in today's episode. I actually have 8 things I'm going to share with you that I regret or would change, and they fall within 2 categories. So first, I'm going to share 4 things that I really regret for my first year or 2 in the classroom, when I would say I was like the freshest new teacher. Luckily, these are 4 things that I did actively change in later years in the classroom. And I'm so glad I did, because it really changed the entire culture of my classroom. So I'm going to start with those 4 things. Then I'm going to share 4 regrets I have from my later years that I would absolutely do differently if and when I do return to the classroom. And I'll share, more about what I talked about at the start of this, of like thinking too much of myself, if you will. And then lastly, to kind of end this positively, I want to share 4 things that I did when I was in the classroom full time that I will for sure be doing again back in the classroom, that I feel really passionate about and are actually things that like I would love to talk about in an interview with someone, and really make sure that whatever school I would potentially return to, that we're on the same page and they are great with me doing these 4 things, because they're 4 things I'm incredibly passionate about. So that's the direction of today's episode. I'm excited to dive in with you to uncover all of my big regrets and hopefully remedy some of them. So without further ado, let's dive in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. So first and foremost, let's start with the early years, and I'm going to share 4 regrets, but these are all things I did change in the later years, and they made all of the difference. And I want to share these. I want to go first in vulnerability, if you will, so that you too can maybe start thinking about things maybe you regret and maybe you might want to consider changing, and what that could potentially look like for you. It doesn't have to be prescriptive. Like the same things that I would change don't have to be your regrets or anything like that. But I just want to go first in doing this. So first, I spent so much time writing resources from scratch rather than potentially outsourcing. And now, obviously, looking back, I can say like, I don't regret it, because I ended up becoming a curriculum writer like full time. It was a career I never intentionally pursued. I realized in writing those resources that I loved it. But y'all, I was teaching full time, and then I was spending another like 20 to 30 hours a week writing resources. And it was kind of insane. And looking back, I wish I had just focused on teaching first, focused on classroom management, parent communication, getting my grading systems down, lab prep and setup, and studying. Like I was studying all the time too, my first year teaching. Like I wish I'd just taken that one thing of resource creation off of my plate and just focused on actual teaching. And then, like, of course, since it's something I love doing, like gotten into it more later. But again, it's this concept I said at the beginning of like, everything was up to me and I had this standard of perfection. And so I was just working insane hours to do all of this stuff. And I think that's something I really could have let go of in the early years. So I want to encourage you too, if you're really passionate about resource creation, like that is great. And if you don't have a family that you're taking care of, like maybe that's something you spend your summers doing. But I would say that is an easy thing to kind of let go of and outsource so that you can focus your energy and your time and your sanity on other things. Like I kind of had this perception that no one could do it as good as me. And so then, and again, that's really a point of pride where I needed to humble myself and accept help. And even if the resources weren't as good as what I could have done, they were still good enough. And so that's where I really regret doing that. And the way that this changed, because this is in that category of things I did wrong in the early years that I changed, is when I got thrown AP Bio, like very last minute, and it was going to be my like 5th or 6th prep. I've even lost track at this time, but I had all these other things going on, all these other responsibilities. We were trying to start our family through adoption. Like there was a lot. And when I got through an AP Bio, I am so glad that I did not kill myself to write an AP Bio curriculum. People ask me all the time, like, I want whatever you used when you taught AP Bio. And I just tell them like, I can't give it to you because I outsourced that. I was purchasing resources. I was gathering free resources. I was making some up myself. I was using a ton of resources provided by College Board. Like ultimately, that's what I was doing. I was really a resource curator. I was not a curriculum writer of AP Bio. And y'all, it worked out fine. Like, yeah, there were things that were like ugly or not formatted right, or like I would have written those analysis questions differently than the ones that I used, but it still got the job done. And I could focus most of my energy on studying and really supporting my AP Bio students. And I've shared before, like I had insane pass rate, like 80% of my students passed the AP Bio exam. And and again, with potentially zero resources that I created. Maybe I created like 1 or 2 from scratch, but almost everything I used for AP Bio, I got from someone else. So that is my first suggestion in your early years is like, don't be afraid to outsource. And like, that is such a good way to take something off of your plate. And especially like getting resources from teachers that have more experience. And maybe you would do it differently, but you have the whole rest of your teaching career to write resources and do it differently. So I highly recommend that. And of course, obviously I have to do a shameless plug. If you're going to be teaching physical science, biology, anatomy, or chemistry, like check out It's Not Rocket Science because I would love to support you in that. And I'll link units and curricula in the show notes. But absolutely outsource, especially if you teach a course like an AP course where College Board provides you so many resources, like use those. Don't reinvent the wheel. The second thing that kind of goes along with that I regret that I luckily changed, again, all comes back to my own pride and being humbled, was not asking for help. I just felt like they would regret hiring me if I showed them my own ignorance, like, or my own weakness. Like that's genuinely what I thought. And so there would be things I literally didn't understand. And I would just be like, well, I'm just going to do my best and keep going on, as opposed to just being like, hey, I don't really understand this. You know, like I don't understand what we're doing as a department or this lab that you're saying we all have to do, or I don't understand this new initiative they asked us to do in the faculty meeting. Like, can you help me understand it? Can you make more sense of it? Like, it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. And I wish I had understood that and asked for help sooner, because as I started to humble myself and again, started to chip away at that false belief that it all was up to me, I started to realize like all these people around me have so much experience and so much to offer. And what's the worst that can happen is like they say no if I ask for help or if I ask for something to be clarified. And that's really like a muscle, that a humility for me is a muscle that I didn't have. And I had to like create by doing reps and like getting reps in of like constantly humbling myself. And it's something I'm still constantly doing, but not asking for help was a huge one. Third thing I regret from the early years was assigning homework and lab reports. Now, this was something I just did because all of the other teachers in my department were doing them. So I just kind of jumped on board, like this is what we're doing. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like I think if you're overwhelmed with decision fatigue about how to run your classroom, like trying out what other teachers are doing around you is a good strategy. And then when you realize it doesn't serve you or your students or your purposes or design for your classroom well, then not being afraid to let go of them. And that is something I did in my later years. I stopped assigning homework. I stopped doing formal lab reports. I was the only one in my department that stopped doing those things, which is awkward. But at that point, I had some other things I'd really figured out in terms of how I wanted to run my classroom. And I was getting the resources written, getting that under control. And so I started testing out these different strategies, and it just completely transformed my classroom culture and my grading philosophy. And honestly, just it had this insane exponential impact that I wasn't anticipating. Genuinely, initially, I just stopped assigning homework and formal lab reports because I didn't want to grade homework or formal lab reports. It was entirely self-serving. And then the ripple effect was so unreal. It just served my students so well and thus served me and made our whole classroom culture better. So that is a regret I had. I wish I'd never done it. Then at the same time, you can always say never have regrets because, you learn from it. So I did learn from it. If you want to hear more about that, I will link my episodes about no homework, episode 96, and no lab reports, episode 105 in the show notes. And fourth, in the early years, I really regret taking things personally. Again, this goes all the way back to what I said at the top. I thought just too highly of myself. I just thought everyone cared about me way more than they care about me, when in reality, we all are just selfish and we care about ourselves. And I took attitudes from students so personally, as opposed to thinking like, what are they going through that's causing them to react to me this way? Or, I just constantly felt defensive, and which left me not open to criticism and feedback. It left me not willing to grow. I had a very fixed mindset because of that, because I was, again, being so self-protective. And so I really wish I hadn't taken things personally. When I started taking feedback better and putting into practice recommendations I was getting from my teacher evals and things like that, from my administrators, my department chair, that kind of thing, I grew so much as a teacher, and everyone benefited from me not taking things personally. And for me, again, humbling myself and thinking more of what is best for my students and not what is safest for me. And part of that allowed me then to be proactive in how I was managing my classroom, managing grading, managing parents, all these things, rather than being reactive, which led me to, being emotional about things and taking things personally that I shouldn't have taken personally. I have a podcast episode about proactivity over reactivity that I will link in the show notes as well. That is a really, really helpful one. Actually, all of these episodes, there's a lot of previous podcast episodes I'm referencing in this episode. I'm putting them all into a Spotify playlist that I'm calling the New High School Science Teacher Spotify playlist. It's really for anybody, but I just was like, hey, if I was a new high school science teacher, obviously I'd want them to listen to this podcast, but there's 200 plus episodes at this point. That's overwhelming. So I kind of curated like my top 10, like getting started episodes. All of these are in there. So you can just check out that playlist. You can find it at itsnorockscienceclassroom.com/new-teachers and grab all these episodes. So those are my 4 regrets from the early years that luckily I did have a lot of growth in these areas. So 1, spending so much time writing resources rather than just outsourcing that and using what others had created so I could focus my energy on other parts of this job. 2, not asking for help. 3, assigning homework and lab reports. And then 4, just taking things personally. Again, putting too much on my shoulders and not really thinking about what's best for students and what's going on in their lives, which is not necessarily like their reactions to me is not because of anything I necessarily did. So those are my 4 regrets from the early years. Now, I have 4 more. These are all things that I don't think I did very good at the entire time I was in the classroom full time. And I really would go into the classroom this next time prioritizing these 4 things. And all of these are things that I've learned since becoming a parent, because I left the classroom when we adopted my oldest and I became a parent. And now we have 3 children. And so becoming a parent just truly changed my entire life and perspective. And I would be such a different teacher as a mom now than I was before when I was not a mom, even though I so desperately wanted to be a mom during those years. But this is 4 things that I would do differently when I go back. First is grace for my students and grace for myself. Like I said, not thinking so highly of myself and thinking more of my students instead of myself. You can't think about others when you're just so concerned about yourself. And so I want to have grace for them and their humanity as well as my own humanity. I was always just trying to be this like superhero perfect teacher. I had such a high standard for myself, and that translated to such a high standard for my students. And since being in the classroom, I've learned about the Enneagram, and I'm an Enneagram 1. And Enneagram 1s can be called perfectionists, but the better term I like to see associated with it is reformers. Like we can see potential and we know how to like push people to their potential. But unfortunately, when we're in an unhealthy place, we push people too hard and we push ourselves too hard. And so I really want to, when I go back one day, have grace for my students as human beings and as like children. I know they're 14 to 18. I know they're like becoming young adults, but at the same time, like as my children age, I have so much more, again, just grace and perspective for these human beings that are learning and like their frontal lobes are like developing and they're just figuring things out. So practically, what would that look like? It'd be offering test retakes more often than not. Like in the past, it was just like, no, this is the line in the sand. I'm drawing it. I'm holding it. Seeing more gray in situations that were always so black and white for me before. Maybe potentially having more makeup opportunities. Just being more flexible on things that I was extremely inflexible on in the past. Again, for them and myself, I had really strict expectations for myself in terms of like getting graded work back in one day. I don't think I ever missed that, maybe once in all the years I was in the classroom, but having grace for myself, like, okay, if something comes up, like that's just not going to work out and it is what it is. And I'm not going to kill myself to get things back in 24 hours, that kind of thing. So grace for students and myself, seeing their humanity in their own, that's my first regret that I would want to remedy back in the classroom. Second would be holding firmer boundaries with admin and coworkers. Again, I just thought like so highly of myself and that I was so important and so essential to like my classroom and my student success and, you know, how the school was being run. And I was like the first to always accept any extra responsibility, any opportunity to like lead a PD for the school, any opportunity to be a mentor teacher. Like I did all of these things. I think now I would potentially, again, recognize my own humanity more and my limitations as a human being, and that my responsibilities outside of the classroom are so much greater than they were previously when I did not have children. Now I have 3 people that depend on me. And so holding firmer boundaries with admin and coworkers and added expectations on me is a way that like I love my family well. And so that's something I would want to do differently. Third is trying new things. I've mentioned that I had a very fixed mindset. I really saw things as black and white, and it was hard for me to want to try something new. I'd want to do more action research in my own classroom. I have learned so much anytime I've tried something new. Like I said before, like when I stopped assigning homework or I stopped doing lab reports or I started doing prime times or I changed up my procedures for lab day. Like I learned so much from doing those things, and I want to continue to do that and really see my own classroom and how I'm running it as an experiment that I can do action research and like test things out and see what works and what doesn't. Trying new ideas. Like I said, like all these teachers around me who do open note tests, and that would have seemed insane to me when I was first in the classroom. Now I'm like, I would like to try that. I would try a whole quarter of open note tests and see how it affects my students and their grades and their learning and just see. I think that would be something I would actually enjoy doing at this phase in my life, in my teaching career. And then lastly, I would really want to prioritize relationships over being right with students. Again, I feel like I'm a broken record here, but like I just felt like I had to be perfect and I had to present myself a certain way for students so that they would respect me and that they would like listen to me. And I just cared so everything was just so black and white. And I held lines so intensely in the sand. And I just don't want to care about being right as much as I used to. This is something I've learned so much in parenting. And I really wanted to translate to the classroom of like, I care about these students and them as individual human beings more than I care about what they're doing in my classroom, how they're doing it, etc. And I really believe that in prioritizing the relationship with them, all the other things will kind of fall in place, as opposed to me prioritizing doing this right and doing things as I said and holding the line in the sand and, you know, making expectations clear and all of those things. So those are 4 things that I would change and do differently. Now, to end more positively, because I feel like this has kind of been a bummer episode of like all the ways that I've really messed up, is here's 4 things that I feel really passionate about that I feel like worked so well in my classroom that I have now seen. I've had this awesome opportunity these last few years doing It's Not Rocket Science and having this podcast of like seeing hundreds, maybe even thousands of teachers all over the country, you know, and some of you in different parts of the world trying some of these strategies and like they're working for you. And so my sample size for my action research in my own classroom has grown and things have been proven to work. And so it makes me even more excited to continue doing those things in my classroom. and they all start with a P. Okay, so these are the 4 things I'm going to end with. 1, prime times. You know I'm passionate about prime times. They worked so well for me. Absolute game changer for my classroom management. And then also just like how my classroom ran, how smoothly it was. I think those first 5 minutes are so important. I will link episode 206 in the show notes, which is like my everything you've ever needed to know about prime times. It's also in that Spotify playlist. So passionate about prime times. Second, packets. I stand by packets still with all of my heart and soul being the best way to organize the instructional resources that I'm giving my students and to keep them organized. Even now more than ever, like I have all these paperless digital packets because y'all requested them, so I offer them. I'm still forever and always a paper and pencil girl. And now, especially in the age of AI, like I want to make things less techie, not because I'm like anti-technology and anti-AI, but because I just think students are craving doing things in a tactile way, like holding paper, holding a pencil. Like it helps their brains so much to do these like fine motor skills. And I just care about packets so much. And in going with that, I care about using my own curriculum. So that's a non-negotiable for me when I go back in the classroom. Luckily, there are a lot of opportunities for where I could teach locally, potentially. And I would say like, hey, I've got to use my curriculum. And anyone else in this department can use it too. But I got to use my packets, got to use my curriculum. And episode 60 is all about why I love teaching with packets. So that's in the Spotify playlist as well. So prime times packets. Third is procedures. Like my classroom management, I had on lock and it was because of procedures. Again, I do want to have more grace with these procedures, a little bit more flexibility, but procedures really are like the bread and butter of my classroom management strategy. And episode 91 shares some of my favorite procedures that I teach my students. And then last but not least, it's proactive parent communication. Episode 195 is my interview with an SSS listener all about her parent communication strategy, which I absolutely loved. But this is something I really grew in my later years in the classroom. And I think now even more so, I'd have so much more grace in communicating with parents as a parent. And I could do it in a more kind tone, speaking parent to parent. But that's something I have just found, like I've talked about here before, meeting ASAP, as soon as possible, face-to-face in the school year is such a game changer. And it takes so much time. But if you can do it on the front end, it just saves so much stress on the back end. And so that's something I'd want to be incredibly proactive about and really prioritize in my classroom. Like I would rather grade less to have more time to communicate with parents and other stakeholders than grade all of the things and have no time to communicate with parents. So prime times packets, procedures, and proactive parent communication. Those are the 4 things, non-negotiables I would be prioritizing if and when I return to the classroom, which feels like it could be sooner rather than later, which is crazy. So here is my take-home challenge for you today. Share this episode with a teacher friend or share the new teacher, high school science teacher Spotify playlist with a teacher friend, especially if you have like new ones coming in your school. Send them to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/new teachers. I think it would really, really encourage them. And it's a way to say like, I'm excited for you to come here, or to a coworker friend, say, hey, I appreciate you. This is totally free to listen to. I hope it would be encouraging to them. And if not, if you want to leave a review for me, I would love it. I have not asked for reviews in several weeks of the episodes that I've been putting out, and it shows because I've not gotten reviews in a hot minute. So I would love if you would leave a review, especially if you're on Apple. If you leave a 5-star rating and then type a comment for your review, I would love for you to do that. Or on Spotify, you can leave a rating there as well. The reviews aren't quite as like in your face on a Spotify podcast as they are Apple, but I would just love to hear from you guys. And so if you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, if you want to keep me humble and you've got some feedback for me, you can always find me on Instagram at It's Not Rocket Science. And you can find the show notes with all sorts of links that I've mentioned at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 234. And if you just want to DM me too and let me know some things that you've regretted in your maybe early years in the classroom that you've changed, ways that you've kind of grown in your practice, or maybe you're like me and you've learned to start thinking less of yourself and putting less pressure on your own plate, I would love to hear from you. It would just be really encouraging. So don't hesitate to reach out. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.